You know what sucks? Having an anime you really enjoy and want to get people into, but having to recommend that anime with a disclaimer, whether that be, hey, the animation is a little dated, or this character can be really annoying, or the age-old classic. It starts slow, but it gets good. Just stick with it. Now, I'll be honest, I kind of just ignore when people tell me that. Either I'm gonna sit and enjoy a series enough to watch it unfold and get more entertaining, or I'm dropping it early on because I'm not feeling it. And neither of those decisions are really impacted by someone giving me a heads up or not. But there's one anime that was a true oddball for me when it came to this. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. When you see all the funny clips and all the funny moments and people are talking about their favorite parts, I won't stake the claim that Phantom Blood isn't in those conversations at all. In fact, one of the most iconic memes is from Phantom Blood. But it takes up a noticeably smaller portion. Unlike some though, I don't think this is a reflection of the quality, and I think Phantom Blood gets a bad rap for two major reasons. One, everything after Phantom Blood just keeps getting better and better and more wacky. There's for sure some wild moments in Phantom Blood, especially if you're looking at it as its own standalone work, but it's just not comparable to some of the later things in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. So this thing happens, especially in first time viewers, where Phantom Blood comes across a lot worse and a lot more uneventful than it actually is. The second reason, and what I personally want to focus on here, is there's a huge underappreciation of Jonathan and Dio and their dynamic as a whole. Now, underrated, underappreciated, undervalued, they've all sort of become these buzzwords in the last 5 or so years in critique culture that some people use when they want to defend something of hate, and that's fine, but that's not quite what I'm doing here. Phantom Blood easily comes across as the tale of pure good meets pure evil in an epic battle to the death, and don't get it twisted, I'm positive that's what Araki was shooting for. He just happened to add a few more layers that aren't as easy to notice as they would be in later parts. I'm here to present those layers for you and hopefully get some more people on the Phantom Blood train, but I know you're a busy person, aren't we all? So I won't even do a full breakdown of the entire part. I'll show you the hidden greatness only using the very first episode. Before getting into Jonathan or Dio though, first we need to look at their fathers and the impact they each have on our main characters. Probably don't need to say this, but if you haven't seen the first episode of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, spoiler warning in 3, 2, 1. Okay. Episode 1 opens and we see that George Joestar and his family have been in a terrible accident. Jonathan, only a baby at this point, crying, his mother passed, not having had survived the crash, and his father laying unconscious. Dio's father Dario comes across George and his family looking to scavenge any loot like a vulture when George miraculously comes to. Now, if you've been sent unconscious from what we can only assume in George's case is blunt force trauma, of course you'll be disorientated waking up, but when we see George assume Dario is trying to help him, this can be taken as seed planting along with how George handles future confrontations between Jonathan and Dio for how gullible he truly is. As far as Dario is concerned, we learn that he's an opportunist. The worst form of an opportunist, but an opportunist nonetheless. So sure, George waking up probably persuaded Dario not to steal from him a little, but Dario having a favor in his back pocket from someone so wealthy is seen as a much more valuable thing than whatever he could have gained from George's pockets in that moment. Fast forward a little in JoJo's timeline, and Jonathan has now grown into a teenager. We see he's a little goofy and can be ill-mannered at times and often falls victim to the same gullible trait that his dad does, but looking past that, he has a strong sense of self and knows exactly who he is and who he wants to be, and he makes sure to let us know that when he steps in and sees Arena being bullied and harassed. It doesn't go over too well for him, but he does get the boys to leave Arena alone and make sure to voice he didn't help her out of any kind of self-interest, but because it's the right thing to do. Look at that chivalry, my boys, y'all gotta take notes. It brings up the age-old question of, are your intentions more or less important than your actual physical actions, especially if those physical actions still lead to a good thing being done. Either way though, Jonathan is solid on both fronts, but what's important to note is this isn't the final evolution of his character. That stands to be seen until Dio is introduced into his life. Speaking of which, the one and only Dio Brando. I see a take often that Dio is an awful character who exists solely to make Jonathan more likable, and I guess those people feel as though Araki knew Jonathan wasn't the most interesting, so he made Dio as unlikable as possible in this weird kind of backwards way to try to force us to root for Jonathan. And that's certainly a way of looking at it, I guess. Look, I hate being the guy who hears a person say why they don't like something, then proceeds to get really argumentative and defensive about it, because after all, these are just opinions and it's someone else's perspective, you know? But this take specifically majorly downplays Dio. Dio has a major similarity to Jonathan in that he knows exactly who he is and who he wants to be. Like how Jonathan sort of inherited his father's gullible nature, Dio inherited Dario's heavy opportunity mindset. We get to see Dio sort of an evolution of his father, but also not really. What truly makes Dio so interesting to me is that he's the dark, grimy side to a hustler's mentality that's rarely highlighted in fiction or in society. Whenever we think of the come-up underdog story, we like to paint it in a positive light. The notion of going from nothing to something, after all, seems like something that always deserves praise. Even when you're watching a story unfold of a character do something society is deemed morally wrong, like be a drug dealer, a part of you still kind of wants to see him succeed and run off into the sunset. It seems like rarely we talk about all the people who on their path to success lied and backstabbed and cheated and became an all-around morally compromised soul on their rise to the top. But that's Dio. That perfectly embodies Dio. That's the beauty and charm of his character. I think that is something uncommon to think about, and it can be easily glanced over. The second time we ever even see Dio on screen is him beating a man in a game of chess at a bar for some money. After losing, the man slams Dio's head into a plate of food. Now, in his victory, yeah, sure, Dio was a little smug, but he didn't do anything to truly garner this type of response or disrespect. The most important part of this moment, though, is when Dio almost grabs a fork to defend himself, but instead settles for just making sure he collects the money from the chess game. This moment is Dio wrestling with his own ideologies that he'll build on later in the future. Dio hates the feeling that he's experiencing right now in this moment, the feeling of being powerless, the feeling of having to settle for the scraps you were given. And I think this is something we all can relate to. Even if you aren't the type of person to bring the world to its knees and make it give you everything you feel like you deserve, there's still a part, I believe, in all of us who wants that opportunity. Even if I don't have the mentality to take it at this moment, maybe at some point down the line I will, so I always want the chance to do so. I never want to have that taken away from me, and while on a much smaller scale, this is what happens to Dio in this very confrontation. Moments later, we see Dario has taken his last breath in a dark, damp home with nothing to his name of value other than the favor he was owed from George Joestar. Araki shows us these two key events, one to nail home how hard Dio had it growing up, but more importantly to really convey where Dio's outlook and motivation on life comes from. He doesn't just show up to Joestar Manor and decide to become the worst human being imaginable for no reason. He sees all his actions as a means to his own personal glory and success. In fact, early on in his story, rarely are we being told Dio takes joy in his messed up actions. Now, I don't want to get the lines too blurred. He's not necessarily remorseful about burning a dog alive either, but this is much more than a petty back and forth squabble for him. He sees something much more valuable at stake: his legacy, his pride, his honor, his dreams. So let's finally introduce Jonathan back into the mix. I know I had a lot more to say about Dio, but Jonathan's characterization really begins and ends quite literally with Dio. Once Jonathan meets Dio, his evolution as a person is fast-tracked. No longer can he be a gullible kid always expecting and assuming the best out of people. Due to his father not being able to see Dio for who he truly was, it forces Jonathan to grow out of trying to please his father so much, something that was majorly holding him back. Dio forces him to find balance in his life, and it's a good commentary. Jonathan realizes that it's important to have a strong sense of self, but not to let those beliefs cripple you because you're so unwilling to adapt to what's happening around you. It feels like a really simple lesson on not being stubborn when I tell it in a video essay format, but when you watch it play out with Jonathan, or in your life or in someone's life around you, it becomes really cathartic. So we're at the end of the video now, and here's my call to action. If you've ever heard the notion Phantom Blood is a slow start, let's start specifying slow in comparison to what lies ahead, because by no means is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 1 something to glance over and embed as a smudge on the legacy of this series. Phantom Blood is a beautiful but simple start to one of the greatest stories ever told in the modern era of fiction. And that's the end of the video. If you enjoyed, go ahead and leave a like, go ahead and subscribe. I make videos of this quality or better all the time, so you don't want to miss them. Yeah, that's all I got. I'm leaving.